Hey, so welcome back and to Make It Conscious and to this series on the future of work. So, this is the fifth episode in this series. So far, we've talked about the nature of work as a spiritual practice. We talked about how you can know yourself and what it is you can actually offer in terms of work and finding your vocation. And we've talked a bit about understanding how you can apply that to the needs of the world as it's configured today. And so a theme here is that this is all about, in keeping with everything else in this channel, it's about the pursuit of freedom ultimately. And so I made the point of how pursuing freedom in the material world is a cornerstone of that. I would say it's probably one of four cornerstones to the pursuit of freedom and self-knowledge. But however, that if you are struggling to make ends meet in the material world, then there's something lacking there. Now, often when you pursue these subjects online or anywhere really, you might find some extreme views. At least I would say they're extreme because on one hand, they might say that basically materiality has nothing to do with spirituality or self-knowledge. It's this entirely separate thing, and you just have to make money to keep yourself alive. And they might talk about it in terms of, well, earning your keep, or, well, you all got to eat, right? We've all got to have a roof over our heads. Yes, but I think there is actually a deeper philosophical reason why contribution, as I would call it, is necessary. It's completely necessary to this whole journey of becoming. On the other hand, there are those folks who would have you believe, implicitly or explicitly, that basically, as long as you're getting what you want, as long as you're in charge of your material world, then that's like the ultimate aim. And it's pretty clear that nothing speaks or suggests self-actualization more than material performances. This is why we have status symbols in society. This is why everyone wants to appear like they've made it in some way. And often, just like everything else in our world, it's a kind of compensation. Irony is everywhere. It's arguably the core defining characteristic of our world. And so this project of learning to contribute materially and gaining benefit from that, sure, but walking that middle way between doing what's right for you and doing what's right for the world and not actually just falling on one side of that extreme, this is all a very key part of this whole self-knowledge journey. Said in short, if you're struggling materially, there's something there about yourself that you're not yet seeing or haven't yet resolved. And so I want to take this whole series here to talk about the nature of work, the future of work, because it's a rapidly changing area. And one thing you often hear today, by the way, is this comment around like how things are changing faster than ever. I've said it, I've thought this myself, and I've actually been questioning that a little bit recently. I wonder if there's ever been a point in time where things haven't felt like they're changing faster than ever. Well, you could say, yeah, but they're just getting faster and faster, aren't they? Are they? I don't know how you'd measure that to start with. I think what we're experiencing is a particular kind of change that is very particular to our age in which we live. So on the side here, I've actually been reading a bit about macro astrology. I won't go there now, maybe a later time, because it's a fascinating subject. No matter whether you believe, as it were, in divination or astrology, or you think it's all complete woo-woo, a wise man once said that life is woo-woo, right? There is actually a series available on makeitconscious.com about divination and why it has value, and it's not nearly as necessarily mystical or magical as many in the materialist camp might assume. Ultimately, if you're open to the utility of symbolism, then divination, astrology, tarot, things like this necessarily have some kind of value, if nothing else, just as a library of symbols. And if you use it as a way of understanding where we are in this point in time, it can be very, very useful for grounding oneself. Because if nothing else, it gives you perspective, gives you a macro perspective. And so a lot of the changes we're seeing around technology could actually be assigned to astrological forces, or at least long-term forces that are new, no doubt, and are unprecedented in many ways. But in terms of the rate of change, like, are things actually changing faster than ever? I think that's a difficult thing to measure, for one thing. And doesn't necessarily stand up to history. Any attempt to measure it often sort of becomes quite sort of centric to the time in which we live. You can measure population and you can say, yeah, it just exploded. But you could also do the same exercise in 150 years and say, oh, look, it's tapered off. So it's a difficult case to make. But what this means for us right here is that when we talk about the future of work, what do I really mean by that? Which future are we talking about? Are we talking tomorrow? Are we talking next year? Are we talking some ideal future point in time, some theoretical potential? All of those things. I mean, my mind naturally leans towards what's possible and what would actually make sense, like ultimately in a sort of ideal kind of way. Because as you may well know, I talk about idealist philosophy on this channel. I talk about Jung. I'm trained in Jungian coaching, so I have a lot of time and respect for Jungian psychology. It's by no means not even close to being the first framework that I use, but it contains a huge amount of value, and Jung made some very key discoveries in psychology, arguably philosophy too. And so I'm interested in what's this essence that we're moving towards here. I don't want to get too carried away with like what could be possible in 1,000 years' time. I think that's important. We need to think about that because we always have to be bearing in mind what it is we're circumambulating back to here. But I think the reality is that within our lifetimes, yeah, no doubt, we're already seeing incredible change, and we're going to continue seeing incredible change that we need to be prepared for, that you need to be prepared for, and that has a significant bearing on your own journey as a human being, right? Your own process of self-discovery. And then I would say there's the sort of more medium-term outlook. So there's basically the short, the medium, and the long term, to put it concisely. But I would probably think of it in terms of the actual, like what's demonstrably happening right now, what are the trends that are occurring, the real, so what is theoretically probably almost inevitable within the next 10, 50 years, within a lifetime of anyone watching this. And then we might also differentiate again with the ideal. So yeah, the ultra long term, but also what this is really ebbing and flowing towards. And so with that in mind, I was taking the last couple of weeks to think more about this series, read around, listen to other podcasts around work and AI and technology and leadership. And I don't work in an office, but I used to. And one thing that surprised me is to learn that actually, apparently hybrid working is back on the scene now. So this is now the way things are going. And my friends who still work in offices tell me that this is the case, that I had this idea that, well, organizations around the world now have just woken up. So working in the office, generally speaking, has been seen as like, okay, it's less effective for a lot of folks, not for everyone, but for a lot of people, they actually do better work at home. It saves everyone money. Commuting to any major city in the Western world is a nightmare usually. So why not just allow flexible working? Well, a lot of companies have now said that in itself is also too one-sided. We need to actually not only have you in some of the time, but we need to be in control of that. And so this idea of hybrid working, and it's quite a blunt tool because it's like, okay, you have to come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You have to come in between these hours. And I'm thinking, okay, clearly we're back to a power dynamic here. This is no longer about a negotiation where both sides of this transaction, the employer and the employee, are thinking win-win. This is now back to, okay, the employer saying, we're the ones in charge. We're going to tell you what you need to do for us. And we need you to do this thing right here. And maybe even thinking that your growth and your development of self-knowledge is not necessarily in line with what they want. Well, I believe, and it might be a little bit idealistic, that the way an organization should work, and the way I believe the organization of the future will work, is that your discovery of yourself, let's be more precise here, you going the way you need to go, and the company going the way it needs to go, should align. So in other words, the company of the future should want you to do your inner work. It should be an advantage to the organization. And where you doing your inner work reveals that maybe this isn't the place for you to be, okay, no problem. It might be uncomfortable. And this is the thing, as humans and societies, these are just different orders of magnitude of the same thing, in a sense, in this way at least, which is that we tend to avoid pain on whatever scale. An individual can go further, but an organization tends to be a little bit slower to maneuver and tends to operate from a baseline that's many steps behind. And so many organizations today are not thinking about it that way. Most of them, in fact, are not thinking about it that way. But if you learning something about yourself means you suddenly realize that you're not working in the place that's right for you long term, it's best for everyone that you leave. But the way a lot of companies think today is that actually that's negative, because that means you're going to leave, that's going to cost them money, and then you're not going to be able to do your job anymore. But of course, all things considered, they shouldn't want you doing your job if it's not the right job for you. It's not going to be the best use of your skills. They'd be far better off finding someone or something that can do that job more effectively than you can. So that's just a bit of a prelude to say that I've been thinking about this whole thesis, and there's a lot more to be said here. So I want to be precise that the future of work is different from the future of you. The future of work is long, multifaceted. There's those three components that I find useful that I discussed: the actual, the real, and the ideal. And the same is true for you as well, except for the fact that you're going to live for who knows how long, right? Another several decades, depending how old you are, maybe more, maybe less. And so what unfolds within you is not necessarily what's happening in culture at large. It is pretty typical that an individual will think ahead, right? They will come to realizations that haven't been fully integrated on a cultural level. And yet, I think that they do eventually. And we're going to see that in today's episode, because today I'm going to be talking about the role of evil and deception in the world of work. Specifically, what I call post-moral scamming, or the post-moral scammer. And if you saw my Mapping the Shadow series, you'll know that, because towards the end of that series, I talked about the role of evil in self-development and in shadow work. And so in the world of work, guess what? It shows up, it plays a role. So this isn't the place to talk about why evil exists or anything like that, but just to say that where it shows up in the world of work, just as it shows up in any other world, any other realm, it helps you to realize where you are not fully individuated. So it helps you realize your own self-contradiction. And evil at its core is just incessant self-contradiction. It's something that has become so enamored with itself, its idea of self, that it becomes self-contradictory almost to an infinite degree. In practice, of course, people are very, very complex, and everyone has a degree of self-contradiction. Some are more committed to it than others. Some are more resistant to their capacity for growth than others. But in any case, your encounters with it will hone your ability to master your material world. So the more discerning you can be, the more free you can be, not least in the kinds of people you do business with, the kinds of entities you buy from, but also what you actually offer as well. So following on from the previous episodes here, if you're just selling snake oil, right, then are you really contributing? If you're helping people to scam others, then are you really helping people? So why am I saying this now? Well, one reason is just simply I had a recent experience that brought this all to mind and made me think of this. And I've just written an essay called The Post-Moral Scammer. You can check it out at makeitconscious.com. And on the basis of that essay, I thought I'm going to do this episode here because I do think that this is a particular kind of behavior, this post-moral scamming that I'm going to describe in a moment. I think this is a behavior that is reaching a kind of crescendo in our world. I mean, it's just, I don't know how you feel when you open up your social media, you watch the news, you listen to a politician talk. It's nothing new, right? I mean, just deception, performance, it's everywhere. It's like a cacophony of misdirection, deception, to the point where you're thinking, look, I know this isn't authentic. You know it's not authentic. You know that I know that you know why we're still doing this, but it's still happening anyway. And this is often the way with any kind of thesis or movement. I'm not going to delve into my shadow map model too much now, but one of the main points of this model was that any idea, any thesis, beyond a point, insists upon itself and becomes performative, becomes self-contradictory. And with any movement, whether it's the movement of capitalism in the world, whether it's the movement of the public relations industry, whether it's the idea of measuring progress using gross domestic product, the size of the economy, all of these are ideas, and they all contain elements of value and truth and goodness. But beyond a point, they become corrupt. And so what often happens is innovators and those who are interested in freedom, they develop these ideas, and not always, because some of them are developed for the purposes of power and control, which we will also see soon. But often these ideas aren't developed for that reason, not entirely. And they serve some valuable purposes. But then those that then carry them forward and carry the torch often end up just continuing the thesis, acting it out without really knowing why they're doing what they're doing. And it reminds me of a Schelling quote from many episodes ago. In fact, maybe I will just find it very quickly because it's very relevant to this, where he said that one who has tasted freedom can feel the longing to make everything analogous to it, to spread it throughout the whole universe. One who does not come to philosophy by this path follows and merely imitates what others do without any feeling for why they do it. So this is exactly what I'm talking about here. And so whatever the movement might be, let's take, for example, the movement of just making money for your company no matter what. Well, in the early days of capitalism, that was a very, very effective, powerful force. It was by no means perfect. It caused all kinds of collateral damage, externalities. There was a dark side from the very beginning. There always is. But what happens over time, if you study any economics, you'll know from microeconomics that you get this sort of diminishing returns and you get the marginal cost that increases. And eventually these two curves cross each other. It's a very similar idea. So the value creation goes down gradually and the costs, the side effects go up. And at some point, the actual consequences exceed the value. And it's just creating more harm than it's creating good. It's doing more harm than good. And that, I think, is what's happening now with, I want to say the Western world, but it's actually a global phenomenon, but that originates in the West. And that is the Western approach to doing business generally. So I've worked many jobs. I've worked as an environmental consultant straight out of university. I've worked in tech sales. I worked in 2 different companies doing a kind of tech sales. I worked for a small startup selling to big global organizations, which is a very unique experience because we're probably the smallest company in the world that was selling to these, one of, no doubt, selling to companies of this size, global blue chip companies. And then from there, I moved to a very large company that was actually national. So I've seen a lot of different things in the working world. And then for the last 10 years now, I've been working exclusively for myself. So I've experienced a lot of different industries. Before university, I even worked in restaurants. I worked in an old people's home for a couple of days. I've done all kinds of things. And I've seen how a lot of these companies and industries operate from the inside, for better or worse. So let's move on. The post-moral scammer. What is this? Well, hold that for a second, because I want to read first a post by Seth Godin. You'll know that I love Seth Godin, and I always find his blog posts tend to capture what I'm trying to say in a very concise way. So here's a post from a few years ago called "A Country for Con Men," and it's just an excerpt. But he said, "The medicine show hypester, the confidence man, the snake oil salesman. My country has a long history of marketers of ill repute. The reason is simple. We spent 200 years spreading out over the continent. And unlike Europe, strangers were common. Everyone was coming and going. And it wasn't unusual at all to engage with someone you didn't know. The downside of this openness are all the people who took advantage of it, a tradition that continues to this day." Then fast forward to the end, he said, "So we have to remain vigilant, teach our friends and customers to be on alert, and push regulators to take care. because there's still a con artist on every corner. So this is what I'm aiming to do here, to alert my friends and my customers to be on alert and to pay attention to what's going on, because that's the aim of this channel, is to keep you abreast of the awareness adoption curve, right? These things have a kind of adoption curve. I think the phenomenon I'm going to be talking about today itself has a kind of awareness curve. And I think that even though most folks are aware of deception in our world, it tends to be very selective. And there's a general lack of understanding of what it is in its universality. And not least because our whole Western culture is built on metrics of progress. It's built on this post-Enlightenment obsession with measurements, not least the measurement of GDP, which is a phenomenon that's barely 100 years old and served a great purpose, bringing the Western world out of a post-war slump. But as we are clearly seeing, has a real dark side as well. But when it comes to deception in the marketplace, it's just everywhere. These dark patterns, as they are known, are absolutely rife online. And I really want to heighten your thinking here to, like, what's really behind that? Why are people doing it? And what does it actually mean about them and about you if you're falling for it? Because humans love to believe what they want to believe. If we want to buy a product, we'll overlook such things. And I think we have to be very careful, because what appears to be a minor little overlooking there can actually show up in other ways that are quite catastrophic. It could be certain relationships you pursue. It could be certain house that you buy. It could be where you choose to live. So the unwillingness to actually look at things as they are can be devastating. Now, back to Seth's post here, I agree, there's still a con artist on every corner. But this is not merely an American phenomenon. I think that it may have, as a sort of industry, started in the US and spread out across the Western world and now the rest of the world as well. As for it happening because there were strangers everywhere, and so people could kind of get away with it, so to speak, well, guess what? Now the commercial world is all about strangers. I don't know most of you watching this. Most of the people who, for example, order birth charts on my website are new to me, with some exceptions. And that's the case for all kinds of online business, or most kinds. And so the idea of everyone being strangers is pretty key to the online world. It's key to e-commerce, it's key to YouTube. So the same mechanism is still happening, perhaps for that reason. But I think there are other reasons that Seth isn't mentioning here. And I think it has a lot to do with the obsession with metrics, naturally, understandably, but also the intentionality of our minds, where we sort of say, right, the good thing is in that which I'm looking at. It's that thing I need to get. And as I've explained many, many times on this channel, that's actually a means for discovering the self. So, we think that what we need is contained in the object. That's a kind of transference or projection. And when we hang out with that object or that idea or whatever it might be, what's really going on is we're actually undergoing a self-knowledge process. So when you buy that new car that you really wanted, you buy that new house, you feel happy for a few moments. Everyone knows this, right? But what's the deeper, like, meta process that's going on there? And these things tend to come in threes, right? If you experience the same thing 3 times, you notice a pattern. Once is an instance. Twice, it's okay, whatever, it's happened again. 3 times is a pattern. And when you undergo that sort of process again and again, whether it's with material possessions, whether it's with romantic partners, you start to realize, hang on a second, there's a theme here, and I apparently am the common factor. What's going on? So it necessarily comes back to the self. Doesn't deny what's happening, doesn't deny the value of objects, but it does necessarily, if you have empathy and if you're willing to go that way and confront and endure the tension, it must lead to self-knowledge eventually. Let's proceed then. So, scammers. When I say scammer, what comes to mind? You're probably thinking of someone sending you an email claiming to be the relative of some long-lost prince who, for some reason, has decided to bestow you with some large 7-figure number, and all they need is your bank account details to wire you the money. I don't know how many folks are still falling for that kind of scam. Many scams are a lot more sophisticated, and they can involve spoofing phone numbers. They can involve sending you to the wrong webpage, like phishing scams, and can be very sophisticated. And I wouldn't want to say that anyone watching this is above the risk of falling for such a scam. However, these kinds of scams, generally speaking, are a little bit more crass. If you look hard enough, they often, but not always, quite readily make mistakes. I think once you know what to look for, they're actually always making mistakes. But spam emails, phishing emails, it's pretty easy to know what to look for. See where the address is coming from. Look at the URL and the links. Don't click anything. Verify. Only go to websites via bookmarks, this kind of thing. These are all ways of avoiding scams. And so generally, most folks think of these as like a little bit crude, a little bit crass, and no doubt illegal and highly immoral. And anyone doing them is clearly not thinking of anyone but themselves. But I make a distinction here. I think there's a lot more to scams than just that kind of scam. And I would also extend the term scam to what I call the post-moral scammer. So what is this? Well, it's just pretty much any entity, any person, any website that is trying to lead you down a path to make you make a decision that you would not have made if you had all the available information. And they use all kinds of little tricks, all little kinds of sleights of hand or sleights of communication to make you think that things are other than what they are. But the thing is, they're not actually breaking the law often. Sometimes they are, but usually what they're doing is they're not even trying to do things in an ethical way. They're actually taking great pains to stay barely within the law, which, although it'd be quite impractical to make that in itself illegal, should raise some alarm bells. Because if someone is taking great pains to stay barely and only within the law as it is now, then it shows you that their primary driver is not actually some kind of universal morality or ethics. It's something very utilitarian. And so I had an experience recently which went along these lines, and I signed up to some software, okay software, had a couple of glitches, not a big deal. It was pretty useful. I would have happily continued using it if the company selling it had been more honest with me. And so I signed up for a year and I paid the, I think, £50 annual subscription fee. And then when the next year came around, there was an email, but it wasn't very clear about what I was actually paying for, and the price hiked to $30 to £30. And I chose to leave on that basis. And my bad, I actually didn't cancel it in time, but I didn't realize that actually they'd basically taken what I paid for before and divided it into two line items. And so there was all kinds of misdirection, and they didn't actually explain why it was increasing, what it was for, or anything like this. And so it increased, and I asked to refund it, and they initially declined, even though I hadn't actually used the software. So I thought it'd be as simple as saying, hey, look, guys, I haven't used the software. It wasn't very clear to me what was going on here. Can I have a refund? And they were like, no, you can't. Check the terms. And I did a bit of digging and realized that that is actually a violation of UK law. If someone hasn't used the product, and it's a software product, and they haven't actually made it clear what's actually going on here, what the renewal is, what it's for, and so on, and provided information as to why the price is increasing and this kind of thing, then they haven't actually fulfilled their obligations under law. So there's all kinds of factors in there, but basically I got a refund when I mentioned this, and it reminded me of a similar instance from many years ago when a friend of an acquaintance, came up to me in a nightclub, back when I used to go to nightclubs, and this guy was some sort of software founder, and he knew that I ran a business, and so he asked me how's business, and he didn't actually listen to what I had to say. He just dived in there and just wanted to tell me all about himself and his business, and told me, oh yeah, I make, this business makes 5 million in revenue a year, and every day I get offers to buy it, and okay, great, good for you and everything. But then he dropped a bombshell and he said, hey, let me share with you the greatest growth hack that I know. And basically what you do is, when it's the customer's renewal dates, don't send them a reminder. It's the greatest growth hack. Great. So that people who would have cancelled but didn't because they weren't reminded to, don't cancel, and you get to keep them as customers, even though you know that they don't actually want to be your customer anymore. So it was just flagrant admission that actually he wasn't doing this for anyone else other than himself. Now, we know from previous episodes here that you have to straddle both sides. You have to work for yourself and for other people. You can't just do one at the expense of the other. And neither can you merely meet the needs of the world or just do what you feel like doing every moment of every day. So when the real aim is subsumed by, or rather when the apparent aim is subsumed by the real aim, things start to fall off the rails. In other words, it's one thing to actually only want to just scam people and take their money and do so by flying barely within the apparent bounds of the law. But it's another thing to do that whilst pretending to be something else. That is deception, and that is self-contradiction. Because whoever's doing that would quite like to live in a world where other people weren't doing that. That's the point. And so it's not about saying, yeah, well, I get to do that and therefore no one else can. I guess I get privileges. The point is, because this is Make It Conscious after all, right? And we're here to talk about the mind. What that does to your mind is it creates a split. It creates conflicting elements in your own mind. Your own mind will create a conflicted situation if you do that. And so time and time again, we see these kinds of folks just having ruined personal lives, not reaching their potential in any other way, and leaving behind many relationships with people who actually realize that they're just out for themselves. Because if they're only out for themselves in that way, then you can bet your bottom dollar they're out for themselves in most other ways too. So that inspired this post. And so the post-moral scammer. Now, as I said at the start of this episode, these kinds of ploys are everywhere. And we're going to be looking at some a little later, maybe in the next episode, because this has run on. But for example, things like creating false scarcity. Like saying, oh, there's only 3 rooms left on our site right now, I better book quickly. And it's just not true. Like, it's a blatant lie. Or my personal favorite is the being forced to choose from one of 2 options. And one of them is like, yes, I want to be financially free and successful forever. And the other one is like, no, I'd rather be poor and miserable, thanks. No middle ground, apparently. So if you're looking to learn from someone like this, or you're looking to buy a product from someone who thinks this way, do you think that product or that service or that mentorship is really going to serve your interests long term? Is it really going to serve your real interests, your ideal interests? Is there even a place for using it to serve your short-term interests? Is there a place for that? Big question mark around that. I would say in some sense, yes, there is. I mean, this is all about Hegel and his philosophy, talking about the need for conflict and contradiction, how all of these features of our world, they have a place. Like, there's nothing about our world that says you shouldn't experience this or you shouldn't be subject to this. Of course, we all should. And to think that we shouldn't is baseless, because the very freedom you have to be yourself, to realize yourself, it's the same freedom that gives the post-moral scammer the option to try and scam you, or even the stereotypical scammer the option to try and scam you, or someone to try and steal from you or attack you or whatever it might be. We all have freedom. So that's a good thing that we have freedom, but that freedom means that you also have the ability to respond to that as it really is. And so what I'm really saying here in this episode is that I think we can expand the use of the word scam. And I think it's not only these illegal, obvious scams that you might think of, there's actually any attempt to part you from your hard-earned economic energy in a way that you wouldn't do if you had all the available information. And so one might argue that there's a difference there, because a number of differences. Well, the first one is to do with this idea of informed consent. So like, okay, you consented, you read the terms, you did this, you did that. But what I'm saying is there's value and truth in that, but also what is made to look like informed consent often isn't actually informed consent. It's really a way of just kind of slip it through the system. And I think intention matters more than most things. It might not matter as much in terms of the law. And of course, there has to be a burden of proof, and that's necessary. Our legal system has taken a long time to reach its current form. And it's important that people remain innocent until proven guilty, not least, but also that there's a high burden of proof, especially for criminal cases, beyond reasonable doubt. But that also means that you as an individual and whatever company you work for and society at large, there's a burden on you as well to use your own freedom. That's the point here. Because wherever you deny your own freedom, you will be taken advantage of. You'll be taken advantage of someone who is denying their own and just wants the power instead. And so that's what the post-moral scammer does. And so I think the other difference between the two is, well, that a scammer doesn't reveal themselves until they get what they want. Deception is involved in both cases with the stereotypical scammer and the post-moral scammer. But in the traditional scammer's case, they will be revealed once they get what they want. Once they squeeze you for all your worth and they get your money, and that's it. They're off. They vanish, and it's like a flick of a switch. It's like they're gone. There's zero shame, and there's no need to hide anymore. And the reason there's no need to hide anymore is either because A, they've got what they want, or B, because you've unmasked them. You've seen them for what they really are. With the post-moral scammer, it's a little bit more nuanced, but essentially the same rules apply. That is that they will also reveal themselves when they get what they want. Remember the shadow map? This is how it works, right? The underlying truth will be revealed in this inexorable Plutonian kind of way. Like, truth always emerges. It might take a long time. There will be great disillusionment, just as there is with many of our institutions. They're not what we thought they were, right? Whether it's in my home country, it'd be the BBC or the NHS or whoever. We thought they were impartial. We thought they cared about people. Well, maybe they do to an extent, but maybe they care about looking like the NHS more than they care about being a health service, if that makes any sense. And to an extent, this is how things have to unfold. So I'm making the case here that at base, they're actually pretty similar. And why post-moral? Well, quite clearly because they regard themselves to be moral. And it's because this is a modern day phenomenon. And because it pretty much came into being with the decline of religiosity. And we're going to pause here. I'm going to go to the next episode and start recording that straight after this one. But in a nutshell, because it's believed to be moral. It's believed that as long as you're making money, as long as numbers go up, the rest will come out in the wash. And that has its roots in not just post-war situation, but also some earlier thinkers on this subject. So we're going to be going there. But for now, I'm going to leave that there. So I hope that's been useful. And if you're interested to check this essay out, go to makeitconscious.com, go to the blog there, and it's the latest essay. It's called The Post-Moral Scammer, of course. And interested to hear your thoughts. Hope that heightens your awareness to this phenomenon. We're going to be talking more about that in the next episode. Its history, where it comes from, what to look for. And I just want to wrap up by reiterating that this all sits within this overall theme of the future of work and the journey of self-knowledge. Because, firstly, I think this is a phenomenon that has an expiry date. When that expiry date is, I don't know. I have some predictions, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. It could happen in 5 years, it could happen in 150 years. But that's less important because the future of work is not the same as the future of you. So I'm looking to help you notice these patterns in work, in your own dealings as well. Like, where are you doing this? We've all done it, right? And where are you partnering with folks who are doing this perhaps? Or where are you buying from companies that are doing this? And is that something you're willing to accept in our culture going forward? I'm not. I think it has to end. The sooner the better. I don't think it serves us anymore. I think it's a sort of caricaturial form of something that used to sort of serve a purpose, but now we're very much in that dark side, that waning cusp where it's just, you've got basically none of the benefit and all of the cost. So with that said, I'm going to thank you for your time and attention, and I shall see you in the next episode.